The Seoul Connection. A. Frank Murray Investigation. Season 3, Episode 1. The rain came to Los Angeles the way bad news always does. Sideways, unexpected, and impossible to ignore. I was sitting at my desk above Chen's Golden Dragon on 4th Street, watching the water streak down the window glass and blur the neon signs below into something that looked almost like art. 3 weeks since the Prometheus Protocol. 3 weeks since we watched Richard Pemberton climb into a helicopter on Catalina Island and disappear into the Pacific sky, like a ghost made of money and malice. 3 weeks and not a single verified sighting. I had a cold cup of coffee on my desk, a folder of dead-end leads, and a headache that had taken up permanent residence behind my left eye. The headache had been there since Catalina. Sarah said I needed to see a doctor. I told her I needed to see Pemberton in handcuffs. She said those weren't mutually exclusive. I didn't argue, because she was right about most things, and I'd learned that arguing with Sarah Chin Murray was an exercise in exhausting futility. Frank. Her voice came from the doorway. She'd been at LAPD headquarters all morning, running down financial traces through channels I couldn't access without a badge. She still had her detective's coat on. Dark will beat it with rain. Her expression was the one I'd learned to read over 18 months of marriage and 16 years of knowing her. Control concern, which meant she had something that mattered and wasn't sure how I'd react to it. Tell me, I said. Pemberton moved money 3 days ago. She crossed the office and set a folder on my desk. Miles found it. Or rather, Miles found the ghost of it. The actual trail was buried under 6 shell companies and 2 offshore accounts, but the destination is there if you know where to look. I opened the folder. Financial printouts, Miles Danforth's handwriting in the margins, red ink circling account numbers and routing codes. Miles was a 26-year-old former NSA contractor who worked out a converted warehouse in Culver City, surrounded by monitors and empty energy drink cans. He was also the most gifted digital forensics specialist I'd ever encountered, and if Miles said the trail was there, the trail was there. Seoul, I said. Seoul, Sarah confirmed. Specifically, a pharmaceutical research company called Helix Asia Partners, headquartered in the Gangnam district, incorporated 14 months ago. On paper. They do cancer research and biological consulting. In practice, we don't know what they do. I looked up Project Chrysalis. Almost certainly. She sat down across from me, and I watched her choose her words with the precision of someone who'd spent 20 years in law enforcement learning that imprecision costs lives. Miles cross-referenced the corporate structure against the financial patterns we mapped during the Chrysalis investigation, the incorporation dates, the investor profiles, the way the subsidiary companies are nested. It's the same architecture, same playbook, different country. I thought about Emma Reeves. I thought about the 23 documented victims of Project Chrysalis who'd survived the program's genetic modification trials only to live with neurological damage that would color every remaining day of their lives. I thought about the hundreds of others we suspected existed in facilities we hadn't found, in countries we hadn't looked. I thought about Richard Pemberton, somewhere on the far side of the Pacific, building his next empire in a language he probably didn't speak, in a city that didn't know his name yet. How solid is Miles's information? I asked. Solid enough that he called us instead of sitting on it, Sarah said. And you know Miles. He doesn't call unless he's certain. I stood up. My coffee had gone from cold to glacial. Outside, the rain was getting worse, turning 4th Street into something that required a boat. Mrs. Chung would be bringing egg rolls up in an hour, which meant the smell of 5-spice and sesame oil would fill the office, and Detective the Cat would appear from wherever he'd been sleeping and park himself at my feet and look up at me with his one-eyed Buddha serenity. I was going to miss all of that. Book us flights, I said. Already done, Sarah said. We leave tomorrow morning. 14-hour flight to Incheon. She paused. There's one more thing. Of course there was. The money Pemberton transferred. It wasn't operational funding. It wasn't payroll for scientists or rent for a facility. She held my gaze. It was an acquisition payment. $47 million. American. Wire transfer to Helix Asia Partners' parent holding company. He bought something. I said. He bought someone, Sarah said. The holding company's sole asset is a controlling interest in a biotech research collective called the Daesong Institute. They're one of South Korea's leading genetic research organizations. Legitimate, decorated, internationally respected. She paused again. And as of 72 hours ago, they belonged to Richard Pemberton. I stood there for a moment in the dim office above the restaurant, rain hammering the window, detected the cat somewhere in the back room dreaming whatever cats dream about, and I let the weight of it settle over me. Pemberton hadn't just run. He'd run to build something bigger. So, I said again. So, Sarah confirmed. I picked up my cold coffee and drank it anyway. It tasted like everything I hated about this case, and everything I couldn't walk away from. Pack for rain, I said. Seoul in March is wet. She almost smiled. Frank, I'm Korean-American, and I've lived in Los Angeles for 15 years. I know what Seoul weather is like. I almost smiled back. Right. Sorry. She stood, already reaching for her phone to coordinate with Miles. Also, Torres called. He wants a briefing before we leave. Special Agent Michael Torres, Secret Service, had become something adjacent to an ally over the past several months, a man perpetually caught between institutional obligation and personal conscience, who helped us when he legally could and looked the other way when he legally couldn't. He was a careful man, Torres, the kind of careful that kept you alive in federal work. Schedule for tonight, I said. Dinner. Somewhere that isn't here. Mrs. Chin will be offended. Mrs. Chun will survive. I looked at the folder again. The Seoul address, the Daesong Institute. $47 million moving through financial shadows, like smoke through a keyhole. We need to move fast. If Pemberton is setting up infrastructure, then every day we wait is another day his roots go deeper, Sarah finished. I nodded. She left to make calls. I stood at the window for another minute, watching Los Angeles drown in the rain, and thought about what waited for us on the other side of the Pacific. Richard Pemberton was many things. A monster in a good suit, a man who'd sold human beings as research subjects while sitting in board meetings and drinking expensive scotch. But he was also, in his twisted way, a patient man, a builder. He didn't react to setbacks. He incorporated them. He'd lost Project Chrysalis as it existed in Los Angeles, so he'd evolved it. I'd spent 16 years as a private investigator because I couldn't walk away from things that mattered. From the moment I got my license after Caroline's murder, every case I'd worked had been about refusing to let the powerful devour the powerless without consequence. Richard Pemberton had consequences coming. I just had to get across the Pacific to deliver them. Torres met us at a Korean barbecue place in Koreatown that Sarah had picked, which meant the food was excellent, and the table arrangements gave us sight lines to every entrance. 16 years with a detective's wife had made me observant about things like that. Torres looked tired. He'd looked tired since the Prometheus Protocol, the kind of tired that accumulated when you spent months watching a monster slip through every net you built to catch him. He was a compact, precise man in his late 40s, black, with close-cropped hair and an expression that gave away nothing unless he chose to give it away. Tonight, he was giving away weariness and controlled anger in roughly equal measure. He ordered soju. That told me more than his expression did. You know about the transfer, he said. It wasn't a question. Miles found it, I said. Torres nodded. We found it too. $47.3 million. Routed through accounts in the Cayman Islands, Luxembourg, and Singapore before landing in a holding company registered in the British Virgin Islands. He poured the clear liquor into a small glass and looked at it. The Daesong Institute. You know what that place is? Korean biotech, Sarah said. Good reputation. Published research in Nature and Cell. Collaborative projects with Seoul National University. Founded 30 years ago by Dr. Park Jun-ho, who died 4 years back. Now run by his daughter, Dr. Park Jun. Torres looked at her. You've done your homework. I have excellent internet access and a 12-hour head start, she said pleasantly. What do you know about Dr. Park Jun? I asked Torres. He turned his glass in his hands. 38 years old, trained at Johns Hopkins, postdoc at Cambridge, returned to Seoul to take over her father's institute, brilliant by any measure, Her work on CRISPR applications in oncology has been cited over 2,000 times. He paused. She also has substantial personal debt. The Institute's funding dried up when 2 of their major government grants were redirected last year. She's been scrambling for 18 months. And then Richard Pemberton appeared with $47 million. I said, whether she knows who she sold to is an open question. Torres said, Pemberton didn't use his own name. The acquisition was structured through 3 layers of entities, all clean on paper. He finally drank the soju. If Dr. Park is innocent, she's a target. If she's complicit, then she's part of the problem, Sarah said. Either way, she's the key, I said. She controls what Pemberton just bought. Torres set down his glass and looked at me directly. I need you to understand something, Frank. Korea is not Los Angeles. The Daesong Institute is not a shell company in a strip mall. This is a legitimate, internationally respected research organization in a foreign country. The political and diplomatic dimensions of this are, he searched for the word, complex. Meaning the government isn't going to just let us walk in. Meaning the government can't officially do anything yet. Torres said, we have no extradition requests because we have no charges that have survived the appeals process. Pemberton's lawyers have buried everything in procedural challenges. Officially, he's a free man who transferred money to an investment in Korean biotech. That's not illegal. It is if the investment is funding continued human experimentation. Sarah said, when we can prove that, we can act, Torres said. Until then, we go find the proof, I said. Torres looked at me for a long moment. I can't sanction that officially. You're not sanctioning anything, I said. We're private investigators. We travel internationally. We talk to people. And if those conversations lead somewhere dangerous, they usually do, I said. Has that ever stopped us? Torres almost smiled. It was a kind of almost smile that said he'd made peace with a situation he couldn't control. I have a contact in Seoul. Korean National Police Agency, Intelligence Division. Her name is Detective Inspector Shin Yuna. She's been tracking unusual biotech investment patterns as part of a broader organized crime investigation. She doesn't know about Chrysalis specifically, but her investigation and ours are converging, Sarah said. She's expecting a call from a private investigator named Frank Murray and his partner. Torres said she agreed to meet. That's as much as I can give you officially. It's enough, I said. He reached into his jacket and placed a business card on the table. Korean writing on one side, English on the other. Detective Inspector Shin Yuna, Korean National Police Agency. One more thing, Torres said, picking up his soju glass again. Pemberton's movements. We lost him after the helicopter left Catalina. He resurfaced briefly in Hong Kong 11 days ago. Stayed at the Peninsula Hotel under a false identity that took our analysts 3 days to crack. Then he vanished again. He looked into his glass. We believe he's in Seoul. The table went quiet for a moment. Outside, through the restaurant's fog windows, Koreatown moved through its evening rhythms. Restaurants filling up, music bleeding out of clubs 2 blocks over. The particular energy of a neighborhood that held a million things inside its square miles. He's there to oversee the acquisition personally, Sarah said. That's our read, Torres confirmed, which means the window is short. Once he's satisfied the Institute is operational in the way he wants it, he'll move again and disappear somewhere we can't follow, I said. Torres didn't disagree. I picked up Detective Inspector Shin's card and looked at it. Thought about the distance between this barbecue restaurant in Koreatown and the Gangnam district of Seoul. 14 hours by air, a different language, a different legal system, a different set of rules governing what we could and couldn't do. But some things were universal. Power preying on the vulnerable, money buying silence. A man who believed his wealth made him untouchable. I'd spent 16 years proving that last point wrong. We'll call her when we land, I said. Torres nodded. He refilled his glass and raised it slightly. Not quite a toast. More like an acknowledgement. Be careful, he said. We always are, I said. Sarah looked at me. Relatively. I amended. The flight to Incheon was 14 hours and 40 minutes. I slept for 3 of them, which was 2 more than I expected. Sarah slept for 6, which told me she was better at separating herself from a case than I was. She always had been. We landed at Incheon International at 6:15 in the morning Korean time, when the sky outside the terminal windows was a color between dark and dawn, purple-gray and cold. Sarah moved through customs with the ease of someone who'd grown up speaking Korean at home, even when the world around her spoke English. I moved through it with my American passport, and the particular blankness of expression that I'd learned got you through official checkpoints faster than friendly conversation. Our bags arrived. We took the AREX train from the airport towards Seoul proper, watching the Han River appear through the train windows like a silver ribbon laid across the landscape. Apartment towers marched up the hills on either side. The city materialized around us in layers, modern glass and steel in the foreground, older construction behind it, mountains visible in the distance through the early morning haze. Detective Inspector Shin Yuna met us at our hotel in Gangnam. She was younger than her title suggested, mid-30s, maybe, with sharp eyes behind round glasses, and a particular quality of stillness I associated with people who spent their professional lives observing rather than being observed. She wore a dark blazer over a white shirt, her hair pulled back with the no-nonsense efficiency of someone who'd stopped thinking about it years ago. She spoke English with the slight precision of someone who'd learned it academically but used it regularly. "Mr. Murray," she said. "Detective Chin Murray." A small correction. She'd done her research, too. "Detective Inspector Shin," I said. "Thank you for meeting us." "Agent Torres speaks highly of your work," she said, though he was careful not to specify exactly what that work involved. She looked at me steadily. "I would like you to be less careful." I liked her immediately. We went to a cafe 2 blocks from the hotel, not the hotel restaurant, which was the kind of choice that told me Shin Yuna wasn't operating in a fully official capacity on this meeting, or at least preferred not to be seen doing so. The cafe was small, warm, crowded with people in their 20s staring at laptops. We got a corner table, and I ordered coffee and waited while Shin ordered something in Korean that arrived looking complicated and tea-like. "The Daesong Institute," I said without preamble. Shin nodded. "It acquired new investment $47 million American dollars 3 days ago. I became aware of this because the investment structure mirrors patterns I've been tracking in connection with organized criminal enterprises that have been moving money through legitimate research organizations in this region." She wrapped both hands around her tea. "The acquisition target is concerning to me. The Daesong Institute is a legitimate operation. Dr. Park Jun's work is genuine and internationally respected, but the acquiring entity is opaque in ways that legitimate investors are not. The acquiring entity ultimately traces to a man named Richard Pemberton," Sarah said. Shin was quiet for a moment. The cafe hummed around us. "Pemberton," she said. "I've seen this name in connection with American pharmaceutical fraud cases, a conviction that was subsequently overturned on appeal," I said. "He's legally free. He's also responsible for what we believe was an ongoing human experimentation program that we call Project Chrysalis, genetic modification trials conducted on unwitting subjects. At least 23 confirmed victims in Los Angeles and the surrounding area. We believe there are more, potentially in facilities outside the United States." Shin was still for a long moment. Her eyes behind the glasses were precise and cold, the way eyes go when a person is integrating new information and adjusting their understanding of something they thought they already knew. "You believe the Daesong acquisition is intended to establish such a facility in Korea," she said, "or to leverage the Institute's existing legitimate research as cover for it," Sarah said. "Pemberton doesn't build from scratch if he can acquire something with credibility already attached." "Dr. Park Jun," Shin said. "You will want to know whether she is complicit." "Yes," I said. "I cannot officially investigate a legitimate business person on the basis of who bought her company," Shin said. "Especially not one with her reputation." She paused. "However, I have been building a case for 6 months regarding unusual financial flows in Korean biotech investment. Dr. Park's institute has appeared in my research before, not as a primary subject, but as a connected entity. There are questions I wanted to ask her that I have not had sufficient predicate to ask." Another pause. Perhaps you might provide that predicate. You'd like us to talk to her first, I said. Private investigators are not bound by the same evidentiary and procedural requirements as a national police officer, Shin said. If you were to speak with Dr. Park, and if the conversation were to reveal information concern, and if you were to share that information with me. We understand how that works, Sarah said. Shin almost smiled. I thought you might. She set down her tea. I should also tell you that the Daesong Institute has received 2 visitors in the past 72 hours. One was a lawyer representing the acquiring entity. The other was a man whose description does not match any registered visitor and who was escorted through the building's private entrance. She opened a folder and placed a single photograph on the table. The photo was grainy, surveillance camera quality. Time-stamped 2 days ago at 11:42 p.m., a man emerging from a black car, turning briefly toward the camera at the wrong moment. Richard Pemberton, older than the last photograph I had of him. Thinner, with the kind of tan that comes from months in warmer climates. But unmistakably Pemberton. He was in Seoul. He was at the Institute. I felt a familiar tightening in my chest that I'd learned to read as equal parts anger and focus. The thing that happened when a case stopped being abstract and became immediate. 3 weeks of dead ends and rain-soaked windows in Los Angeles. And now here, 10,000 miles from home, the man I'd been chasing was real and close and close. He knows we're here? I asked. Unknown, Shin said. But Pemberton is not a man who survives as long as he is by being unobservant. I would assume he has resources devoted to knowing who might be looking for him. She met my eyes. You should be careful, Mr. Murray. People keep telling me that. I said. People keep having reason to, Sarah said. We got a hotel room by 9 a.m., and I called Miles before my body had fully registered the time zone change. You're in Seoul, Miles said. Not a question. His computer probably showed our location. We're in Seoul, I confirmed. What else do you have on Helix Asia Partners and the Daesong connection? The sound of keyboard activity. Miles always sounded like he was conducting an orchestra. Okay, so here's what I've been digging on since we talked. Helix Asia Partners, the company that nominally made the acquisition, was incorporated 14 months ago, but the beneficial ownership, once you get through the layers, traces to a Nevada holding company called Meridian Life Sciences. Meridian was incorporated 23 months ago, 2 months before the Prometheus Protocol facilities in Los Angeles began ramping up, Sarah said from across the room, where she was unpacking with the systematic efficiency she brought to everything. Exactly, Miles said, which tells us what? He planned for contingencies, I said. He was already building escape infrastructure while the LA operation was still running. Right. The Seoul operation wasn't a reaction to Chrysalis falling apart. It was always part of the expansion plan. More keyboard sounds. Now here's where it gets interesting. The Daesong Institute has 3 primary research divisions: oncology, neurological disease, and what they call genetic expression studies. The oncology and neuro stuff is legit, good science, published peer-reviewed work. But the genetic expression division is newer, founded 18 months ago. Key personnel brought in from outside. 3 researchers whose previous employers I cannot fully verify. Their credentials check out on the surface, but the institutions they claim to have worked to have HR records that are... He paused. Thin. Manufactured, Sarah said. Possibly. I'm still pulling threads. A pause. I also found something about a second facility. The Daesong Institute has a primary campus in Gangnam, but they maintain a research annex about 40 kilometers south of the city, outside a town called Yongin. The annex is ostensibly used for long-term study protocols that require isolation from urban contamination. It's not advertised. It's not on their website. I found it in a municipal building permit database. That's where the real work happens, I said. That's what I'm thinking. Miles said, the Gangnam campus is a respectable face. The Yongin annex is where you don't want press photographers. I looked at Sarah. She was looking at me. Can you get us more on the Yongin facility? I asked Miles. Working on it. Satellite imagery is surprisingly limited. The area is coded for reduced resolution in commercial mapping services, which is itself interesting. Someone requested that limitation. A pause. Give me 24 hours. You have 12, I said. I love working for you, Miles said and hung up. Dr. Park Jun's office was on the fourth floor of the Daesong Institute's main building, a glass and steel structure in Gangnam that managed to look both impressive and somehow modest. The aesthetic of serious work rather than corporate theater. We got past the reception desk by Sarah speaking Korean with the comfort of someone completely at home in it, explaining that we were researchers interested in the Institute's recent oncology publications and that we hoped to arrange a brief meeting. The receptionist made a call. We waited 7 minutes. Dr. Park met us in the lobby. She was 38, but looked younger and older simultaneously. The youth of someone who'd spent her life intellectually engaged, and the age of someone who'd been carrying responsibility for years. She wore a white coat over dark trousers, glasses with thin frames, hair that was slightly disordered in a way that suggested she'd been thinking hard before we arrived. Her eyes assessed us with the rapid precision of a scientist processing a new variable. She spoke to Sarah in Korean first. Sarah replied. Then Dr. Park switched to English, with the ease of someone for whom both languages were equally native. You are not researchers, she said. Not an accusation. An observation. No, I said, we're investigators. Private. American. I handed her a card. The ones with the 4th Street address. The ones I carried everywhere because my name was the only credential I had that actually meant something. We're here about the acquisition. Something moved behind her eyes. I've spoken with attorneys. Not about the legal structure, I said. About who's behind it. The lobby of the Daesong Institute was all clean surfaces and subdued lighting, and in particular quiet places where serious things are done seriously. A few researchers moved through at the edges of my vision. Nobody was paying attention to us. Dr. Park looked at my card for a moment. Then she said, "Come upstairs." Her office was books and papers and 2 monitors showing datasets I couldn't read and a window with a view of Gangnam's canyon of glass towers. She did not sit behind her desk. She stood at the window with her arms folded, facing us. The acquisition was presented to me as international investment in genetic research, she said. The structure was complex, but my attorneys reviewed it. It appeared legitimate. The money is legitimate, Sarah said. Where it comes from is not. Who? Dr. Park asked. A man named Richard Pemberton, I said. American, previously convicted of pharmaceutical fraud. Conviction overturned on appeal. We believe he's also responsible for a program of unauthorized genetic modification trials conducted on unwitting human subjects in Los Angeles. The silence that followed had weight. Unwitting, Dr. Park said. Unwitting, I confirmed. She turned from the window. Her face had changed, not collapsed, because this was a woman with a spine made of something harder than most, but rearranged. The assessment in her eyes had moved from professional evaluation to something sharper and more personal. The terms of the acquisition give the acquiring entity access to my institute's research protocols and facilities, she said slowly, including the Yongin annex. We know about Yongin, Sarah said. Dr. Park absorbed this. 3 of my researchers in the genetic expression division were brought in 6 months ago through a recommendation from a consulting firm I was connected with through my new investors. At the time, I reviewed their credentials and was satisfied. She paused. I have had some concerns since then. Procedural concerns. Questions about certain protocols in the annex that I was told were proprietary to the investors' interests. What kind of protocols? I asked. I was shown documentation describing a longitudinal genetic expression study involving consenting adult volunteers, she said. The documentation was thorough, IRB compliant on its face. She looked at me directly. But I am a scientist, Mr. Murray. I know what legitimate research documentation looks like, and I know what it looks like when someone who is not a scientist has made their best attempt to create documentation that looks legitimate. You suspected something was wrong, Sarah said. I suspected the documentation was constructed after the fact to justify activities that had already been decided upon, Dr. Park said. I am not an investigator. I did not know what to do with that suspicion. I began reviewing the annex's access logs 3 days ago. And I said. She moved to her desk and opened a drawer and took out a USB drive. She held it in her palm and looked at it. The annex has received 12 visitors in the past 3 weeks who are not on my staff and who are not registered as visiting researchers, she said. They arrive and depart through facility's secondary entrance. The access logs show them entering the lower-level research area. She looked up. I have a staff of 41 at the Yongan facility. None of them can explain to me who these visitors are. They're the subjects, Sarah said quietly. Dr. Park's jaw tightened. I need to know what is happening in my facility, she said. I built this institute. I spent 30 years building it, and my father spent 30 years before me. It carries his name. Whatever is happening in that annex. She stopped. Compose herself with visible effort. I need to know, and I need to know that it will stop. I looked at the USB drive in her palm. What's on that? Access logs, visitor records, the names of the 3 researchers I mentioned, and footage from a security camera I installed in the annex's lower corridor 3 days ago when I began having my concerns. She paused. I have not reviewed the footage myself. I was afraid to do it alone. I exchanged a look with Sarah. We'll review it with you, Sarah said, and then we're going to need to move fast. Dr. Park nodded. She handed me the USB drive with the careful decisiveness of a person who has chosen a direction and chosen it finally. Mr. Murray, she said, if what you're telling me is true, if my institute has been used to harm people, that's what we intend to find out, I said. Then find out quickly, she said, because Pemberton, this man, he met with me yesterday. He was charming, enthusiastic about the Institute's future. He spoke about expansion, about taking the research to its fullest potential. She said the phrase with a particular flatness. He's returning tomorrow for a tour of the Yongan facility. 24 hours. I thought about what Miles had told me, about the facility 40 kilometers south of Seoul, about satellite imagery that had been deliberately obscured. Tomorrow morning, I said, we go to Yongan. The footage on the USB drive took 20 minutes to review. We watched in our hotel room, laptop open on the desk. The 3 of us, me, Sarah, Dr. Park, leaning toward the screen in particular tense silence of people watching something they cannot look away from and cannot fully bear to see. The security camera had been positioned in a lower-level corridor of the Yongan Annex, aimed at a set of doors that led to what the facility plans labeled Extended Study Suite C. The footage was time-stamp coded, beginning 3 days ago at 10:23 p.m. The corridor was institutional. White walls, fluorescent lighting, the kind of space designed for function rather than feeling. At 10:51 p.m., a door at the far end opened and a woman was led through it by 2 people in white coats. She was walking under her own power, but something in her movement was off, a slight unsteadiness, the deliberate carefulness of someone trying to maintain dignity while not fully in command of their body. She was perhaps 30 years old. Her head was slightly bowed. She was followed by 3 more people in the next 20 minutes. None of them spoke. None of the white-coated figures spoke to them. They disappeared through the door marked Suite C and did not emerge during the subsequent 40 minutes of footage we reviewed. Dr. Park sat back from the laptop and removed her glasses and pressed her fingers against her eyes. "Who are they?" she said. "We don't know yet," I said, "but we will." "These are people in my facility," she said, "in a space I'm responsible for." "Yes," Sarah said, not gently, because there was no gentle way to say it, but not harshly either. "And that's exactly why we need you to help us do what comes next." Dr. Park replaced her glasses. She was pale and her jaw was set with a kind of resolve that I recognized. The same resolve I had seen in every person who'd come to my office above Chen's golden dragon was something they needed to know, even though knowing it would cost them something. The resolve of people who had decided that looking away was worse than what they'd find when they looked. "What do you need?" she asked. "Tomorrow's tour," I said. "We need to be on it." She looked at me. "Pemberton doesn't know who you are?" "Not yet," I said. "We'd like to keep it that way for as long as possible." Dr. Park thought for a moment. "I can introduce you as researchers, American genetics consultants I've engaged to advise on the Institute's international expansion. It won't survive close scrutiny, but it doesn't need to. It needs to survive long enough for us to see what's in Suite C." Sarah said. And to document it, I said. Detective Inspector Shin needs documentation. Something that crosses a threshold from suspicion to evidence. Dr. Park nodded slowly. There is one more thing you should know, she said. The 3 researchers I mentioned, the ones brought in through Pemberton's network. One of them is named Dr. Kim Soo-hyun. When he arrived 6 months ago, he told me he'd been working at a genetic research facility in Singapore before coming to us. She paused. Yesterday, while I was reviewing the access logs, I checked his personnel file again. The Singapore facility he named was dissolved 2 years ago. The work he claimed to have done there, she stopped. I believe he has worked for Pemberton before. I believe he is Pemberton's man inside my institute. The scientist who runs the program, Sarah said. Yes. Dr. Park stood. She was done being shocked. She'd moved through it into something harder and more useful. I will arrange for you to be on the tour tomorrow. I will be there. And Mr. Murray. She looked at me with a direct, evaluating gaze of a woman who'd built a research institute from a foundation of rigor and honesty and who did not extend trust casually. Do not let him leave that facility a free man. I'll do my best, I said. She left. Sarah and I sat for a moment in the hotel room quiet. She's brave, Sarah said. She's furious, I said. Brave is what you are when you're afraid, and you act anyway. She's past afraid. Maybe that's the same thing, Sarah said. I thought about it. Maybe. I called Miles. Did you get in 12 hours? I asked. I got in 9. Miles said, with a very particular smugness of someone who'd been told a deadline was impossible and had found that information motivating. Yongin Annex. Full structural layout from building permits. Access roadmaps. And here's the thing that's going to matter most. Tell me, the lower level, Suite C and the adjacent areas, they're not on the building permits. They were added after initial construction based on permit amendment filings that were rushed through with minimal inspection. A pause. Someone paid to have that space built quietly. The excavation alone would have required significant. Miles, what's down there? Based on permit amendments and estimated excavation volume, I'm looking at somewhere between 8 and 12 rooms that aren't on any official record. Miles said, climate controlled based on the HVAC specs. Sound isolated based on the insulation requirements. Another pause. Frank, it's the same signature as the Los Angeles facility. I closed my eyes for one breath. Any indication of how many people? I asked. No, but the support infrastructure, food service equipment, medical supply storage, it's sized for more than the official staff capacity. He was quiet for a moment. I think they moved fast, Frank. I think after Chrysalis collapsed in L.A., they moved the program here faster than anyone expected. Whatever's in that basement. It's been running, I said. Yeah, Miles said. I think so. The morning of the tour arrived gray and cold. The kind of Seoul March morning that reminded me this city sat at roughly the same latitude as Boston, which meant spring was a promise not yet delivered. We drove to Yongin in a car Dr. Park had arranged. She in the front seat, silent and prepared. Sarah and me in the back, going over what we knew and what we needed. Sarah had her service weapon, legally transported and cleared through customs with her LAPD credentials. I had my PI license and the particular stubbornness that had kept me alive through 13 years of being shot at. Well, 14 now. We were on this side of the Pacific after all. Detective Inspector Shin had been briefed the previous night. She had a team positioned 2 kilometers from the annex, close enough to respond, far enough to avoid tipping whatever surveillance Pemberton had on the facility. The arrangement required absolute coordination. We could not move until we had visual evidence of what was happening below ground. Shin could not move until we signaled. It was a tight sequence of events that required everything to go right. I've been in this business long enough to know that everything going right is the rare exception. The Daesong annex at Yongin looked, from the outside, exactly like what it was supposed to be, a research facility. Low buildings, manicured grounds, a parking area with a dozen cars, security at the entrance, but the polite, badge scanner variety, rather than the armed and watchful kind. We were cleared through with the ease of people expected. Pemberton was already there. He was standing in the facility's main reception area with two men I didn't recognize, assistants or lawyers or security, the kind of interchangeable, expensive-suited figures that powerful men surround themselves with as armor, and he looked, I had to admit, exactly like what he presented himself as: distinguished, patrician, the kind of man who made large charitable donations and attended gallery openings and spoke at conferences about the future of science and medicine. He also looked like a man who'd done things that would end him if they were ever fully known. He saw Dr. Park first, smiled with the warmth of a business relationship he valued. Then his eyes moved to Sarah and me, and something behind them recalibrated. "Dr. Park," he said, "I didn't realize we'd have additional visitors today. American researchers I've engaged as consultants," Dr. Park said, with the calm precision of someone playing a role she decided to play fully. Dr. Sarah Murray and her colleague. I thought their perspective on the genetic expression program would be valuable. Pemberton's eyes moved to me. I'd seen his photograph 100 times. But photographs don't capture quality of presence that some people carry, the way they make a room orient around them, not through warmth but through weight. "Murray," he said, reading my face for the half-second before I'd learned to make it neutral. "You're not a doctor." "No," I said, "consulting in a different capacity." His eyes were sharp and still. "What capacity?" "Quality assurance," I said. The moment stretched. In 16 years of this job, I've had a lot of moments that stretched. They either resolve or they break, and you learn to tell the difference by 100 tiny signals. Where people's hands are, where their weight shifts, whether the people in the room who are supposed to be background are staying background. Pemberton's suited men were not staying background, but Pemberton himself, to my left-field surprise, let out a short breath through his nose that might have been amusement and turned back to Dr. Park. "I've heard the name Frank Murray," he said. Not to me, to the room. "Shall we proceed with the tour?" He knew who I was, and he'd chosen not to react. In my experience, that was a move of either a very stupid man or a very confident one. Pemberton was not stupid, which meant he was confident, which meant he had something we didn't. I caught Sarah's eye. She'd registered it too. We followed Pemberton and Dr. Park through the facility, and I kept my face neutral and my attention wide, cataloging everything. The main floor labs were exactly what they appeared to be: researchers in white coats, equipment I recognized from every hospital case I'd ever worked, the slightly antiseptic smell of serious science being done. Nothing hidden here. Everything on the main floor was a legitimate face of the Daesong Institute's genuine work. But there was a hallway at the back of the main lab area that led to a staircase, and the staircase went down. "The extended study suites," Pemberton said, gesture with the ease of a man conducting a tour of his own house. "Dr. Kim's work is conducted in a more controlled environment. Reduced external stimuli, climate optimization, cutting-edge methodology." We went down. The lower level was quieter. The walls were painted a slightly different shade of white that I'd seen before, in a facility in Los Angeles that no longer existed. The lighting was warmer, almost gentle in a way that felt calculated. The kind of careful environmental management that told me someone had thought very hard about how to control what the people here experienced. At the end of the corridor were the doors marked Suite C. Dr. Kim, Ji-eun, met us at the door. He was a compact man in his 40s, precise in his movements and careful in his expressions. The way people are when they've learned that betraying reaction is a liability. He spoke to Pemberton first, briefly in English. Then he turned to us. "The study participants are in their afternoon rest period," he said. "We can observe from the monitoring station." "We prefer to see the participants," Sarah said. Dr. Kim looked at Pemberton. Pemberton looked at me. "I think we proceeded far enough with this particular visit," Pemberton said. His voice was still pleasant. His eyes were not. "Mr. Murray, it is Murray, isn't it? Private investigator from Los Angeles, married to a detective. You've done your research," I said. "I always do," he said. "It's why I'm still operational when others in my position would have stopped." He smiled, and it was a smile of a man who just confirmed something he'd already decided about how this moment would go. "Dr. Kim, would you ensure our guests are escorted to the surface?" For men appeared from the corridor behind us. They weren't wearing white coats. I calculated distances and odds. I'd been shot at 14 times and survived all of them, but I wasn't in the habit of inviting number 15 voluntarily. Sarah's hand was near her weapon, but she hadn't drawn, which meant she was running the same calculation. "You can't keep us here," Sarah said. "Korean law." "I'm releasing you immediately," Pemberton said. "You're free to go. I simply want to ensure you find the exit." He tilted his head slightly. "I'm also going to ask that you take a message back to Agent Torres and whatever other interested party sent you. This facility is conducting legitimate research under legitimate authority. Any interference will be treated as the criminal harassment it legally constitutes." A pause. "Goodbye, Mr. Murray." We went up. Outside, in the cold gray Yongan morning, I got 15 meters from the building and texted a single word to Detective Inspector Shin. "Now." The response came in under a minute. "Moving." I looked at Sarah. "He knew we were coming," she said. "Yes." I looked back at the facility. "Which means he let us come. Which means—" "He's not worried about what we saw," she said, "because he's already moving whatever's down there." Inside the facility, I'd heard in the last seconds before we were escorted out the sound of heavy movement, equipment, the specific acoustic signature of a space being rapidly evacuated. I'd heard it because I'd heard it before in a Los Angeles facility that had been emptied in the hours before a federal raid. Pemberton was very good at this. "Call Shin," I said. "Tell her to prioritize Suite C and the sublevel. Whatever they're moving, they can't move at all. There will be something." Sarah had her phone out already. I stood in the cold air of Yongan and thought about the people I'd seen in that security footage. The woman walking with deliberate carefulness, the bowed head, the dignity maintained under circumstances designed to erode it. Pemberton thought he was running. He was right. But Pemberton had made one mistake. He'd let us into that building. He'd been confident enough, contemptuous enough, to let us walk through his operation because he believed it didn't matter what we saw. He'd forgotten something. I've been doing this for 16 years. I don't just see things. I remember them. And I'd seen the face of Dr. Kim Soo-hyun when the four men appear behind us. I'd seen the fractional micro-expression. Not fear, not confidence, but something I'd learned to recognize from years of watching people tell the truth without meaning to. He was afraid of Pemberton, not of us. That made Dr. Kim a possible asset. Shin's team entered the building 11 minutes after our exit. They were authorized under an emergency provision of Korean law that allowed entry when imminent threat to persons could be established, a provision that Torres had apparently spent 48 hours helping Shin document before we'd even landed in Seoul. They found Suite C partially evacuated. Partially. 3 rooms cleared. 2 rooms not. In one of the remaining rooms, they found medical equipment and documentation that would take analysts weeks to fully process, but whose contents were immediately clear enough. Protocol records, consent forms that bore all the marks of the forgeries Dr. Park had suspected, genetic modification data organized with the same clinical taxonomy that Miles had found in the Los Angeles records. In the other room, they found 4 people, 3 women and a man, all Korean nationals, all between 25 and 40 years old, all conscious, all physically unharmed in ways visible to initial examination, all, according to the documentation found with them, enrolled in a genetic expression research program they had been told was a standard pharmaceutical trial with compensation. They hadn't known what was actually being done to them. I stood outside the facility in the cold morning while Shin's people worked inside, and I thought about Project Chrysalis, about the 23 confirmed victims in Los Angeles, about the hundreds we suspected elsewhere, about Richard Pemberton, who had looked me in the eye in the corridor and smiled because he believed he would always be one step ahead. He'd gotten his subjects out. He had not gotten out himself. We found him at Incheon International Airport 6 hours later, with 2 associates and luggage that suggested a long absence from wherever he'd been calling home. He was at the Korean Air Business Class Lounge, waiting for a flight to Tokyo. Detective Inspector Shin arrested him under an emergency mutual legal assistance request that Torres had apparently pulled off through channels I would never fully understand, and chose to be grateful for rather than curious about. Pemberton, to his credit, was composed throughout. He said nothing except to ask for his attorney. He was led to a business-class lounge with the particular contained dignity of a man who was already calculating his next move. I watched him go. Sarah stood beside me. "Tokyo," she said. He had a flight to Tokyo. "Japan," I said. "Another facility?" "That's my guess," she said. "Shin will work on the associates. Miles will find the financial trail." She paused. "This isn't over." "No," I said, "but it started." I watched Pemberton disappear around a corner with Shin's officers on either side of him. He didn't expect to get caught tonight. Whatever comes next, whatever his lawyers do, whatever appeals he files, this happened. Those 4 people in Suite C, this happened. Sarah was quiet for a moment. 4 people found. Unknown number not. "Yes," I said. "Tokyo next." She nodded. "I'll call Miles." Around us, Incheon International Airport moved with its enormous and different efficiency. 40 million passengers a year. Flights departing every few minutes to every corner of the world. The particular anonymity of a place that exists for movement. Pemberton had used that anonymity to build something terrible across the world's borders. We'd started using it to follow him. I pulled out my phone and looked at the flight boards. Seoul to Tokyo, 650 miles. Shorter than Los Angeles to Seoul by a factor of 20. When's the next flight? I asked Sarah. She was already looking. 7 a.m., she said. "We need to move fast." "We always do," I said. Mrs. Chin was going to be annoyed about the egg rolls going uneaten. Detective the cat would survive. We had work to do. 16 years in this business. And the one thing I've learned is that the truth doesn't find people. People find the truth, but only if someone keeps looking. If these cases matter to you the way they matter to me, hit that like button. Subscribe. Ring the bell, because the next case is already out there, waiting to be solved. I'm Frank Murray. I don't quit. Neither should you.